Bienvenidos a Psicología Basada. El día de hoy nos contamos con un invitado muy especial, el Dr. Hayes. Y bueno, ya quiero agradecerle por su disposición de estar aquí. Y bueno, hablaremos sobre la terapia basada en procesos. My name is Italo Campomanes. Welcome to Psicología Basada. Today we have a very special guest, Dr. Hayes. I want to thank him for his willingness to be here. We'll be talking about process-based therapy. So, the first question is, what is process-based therapy and how does it differ from traditional approaches like CBT or even ACT?
Well, process-based therapy, or just a process-based approach, is an attempt to push a reset button on what we think of evidence-based therapy, what we want from it. And the purpose of it is to move out of an era when we defined what we did by protocols done according to a particular model for disorders defined by topographical features of arbitrary collectives. That has not yielded progress. There are no examples of syndromes turning into diseases, not one after 50 years of trying. There are effects going down. We've socialized the entire world to believe that thinking of your struggles as a latent disease that will be unpacked by traditional statistics and by looking at your place in a bell curve compared to other people. We've socialized the world that way. It took 150 years to do it, and it's mathematically incorrect. It will never work. It can't work because it violates its own statistical assumptions. So what PBT is an attempt to say, here's what evidence-based therapy means. And then within that, you can have many models. You can have a cognitive therapy model, you can have a schema-focused model, you can have an analytic model or existential model, very specific, it's all fine. But you have to show that the processes you target, and by processes, I mean the small steps that people take in all of the dimensions psychologically, but also all of the dimensions we see socially in relationships and culture and biophysiologically, and always modified by context, always modified by what the world around us is doing and how they're treating us. If we do that, we already know in this 10-year-long journey and intensively over the last 4 into process-based approaches, it brings people together. They don't have to abandon their heroes or their terms, but it also kind of shockingly has led to discovery that what we think we've been doing in evidence-based therapy is massively far away from what we've actually been doing. And it's landing especially hard on Black and brown people, on persons who are in any kind of stigmatized group for historical reasons. And I can explain what those are. There's a dirty history to these statistical errors that's based in racism, in sexism, in anti-Semitism, among other isms. And so PBT doesn't mean you necessarily using different techniques. It means you holding yourself to account, to measuring and modeling the processes of change that apply to the people that you're working with, and to use the elements or kernels that are most likely to help for that person with their goals in their context at this moment, and abandoning the one-size-fits-all protocols for syndromes era, because it's not led to progress and it's demonstrably harmful, I believe, to world culture and to human beings.
Okay, okay, thanks. What led you to develop this approach?
Well, I come from behavior analysis, which always had this approach, but which didn't know quite get there statistically and was limited by the number of processes that it was dealing with. Direct contingencies alone is a wonderful, wonderful tool. There's many, many things you can do with it. It does, I think, put the person properly in context, socially, physically, economically, in all these ways. And it is proven to be a producer of some of the most robust methods we have, even to this day, to help people. But it couldn't over the mountain of language and cognition. I'm a behavior analyst, lifelong by orientation. But I did not believe that what Skinner had done with language and cognition was adequate for many reasons I can explain, and was able to develop an alternative account called relational frame theory, which has been massively helpful to people around the world in, for example, the ability to create notably better progress with children with developmental delays and who don't have neurotypical language skills or sense of self and the things that come from them. But it also has led to a set of processes that are focused on ancient learning systems that are 1,000 times older than language and cognition, the way we mean it, symbolic learning, relational learning. Operant and classical conditioning developed during the Cambrian period, 545 million years ago, 500 million years ago, and we know it because every species that developed from that time forward does it, and not before. So if you're a slime mold, you're not going to be able to do reinforcement learning. If you're a spider, you can. But we did something remarkable as a species, I think due to our cooperative multi-level selection of developing a communication system, which many non-human animals have, but one that is bidirectional and combinatorial, and that changes how the other principles work. Now, why I'm mentioning that is I was doing work and process-based therapy really in the 1980s, working on developing the principles for the processes that we need with cognition, and then emotion, attention, sense of self, and values, because cognition breaks the behavioral stream up into components by the social community, constantly asking, what do you feel? Are you hungry? Are you angry? I'm going to do this. What are you going to do? These I, you, here, there, now. What do you really want, etc. So the very first study on what we now call idionomic analysis, I think that was done in clinical psychology, but maybe I'm wrong, but it was one of the earliest, was the late Arlinza E. Turner's dissertation in my lab in 1986. So the things I'm doing, making the foundations of this big edifice of very prideful evidence-based therapy, with people saying science has to be done this way or it's not scientific, and yet it can't meet its own mathematical assumptions. I was exploring that 40 years ago. And so the time has come for us to stop following an approach, protocols for syndromes, and aggregated statistics as a way of understanding the particular person, both of which has failed us. And what I did not know back in 1986, but now have discovered, is that statistical physics knew that these assumptions couldn't be met in the 1880s, and it was proven science. It's a thing called the ergodic theorem in the 1930s. And behavioral science only woke up 20 years ago when Peter Molinar said, by the way, all of our statistics are based on the ergodic theorem, which is true. And most statisticians think it's true but not important, because they think they've adjusted to it with individual growth curves and multi-level modeling. We've proven in
Este video está auspiciado por nadie. Así que suscríbete, dale like, comparte, realmente apoyas muchísimo haciendo eso. Dicho esto, puedes seguir con el video.
My work with my team, which we call One Size Fits None, with the international team, myself, Stefan Hoffman in Germany, Joseph Sorochi in Australian Catholic University, Belginder Sadra, Australian Catholic, Clarissa Ong in Louisville, and Cristobal Hernandez in Santiago, been able to demonstrate unequivocally that the statistical methods we're using to try to model the individual as part of traditional aggregated normative statistics massively distorts the individual. And so enough is enough, and we're going to take it in a different direction. And as long as I have air to breathe and my heart is beating, I'm going to fight for a world in which every voice matters. If you're not measuring and modeling, you're not listening. And no one should ever be turned into an error term. And if you're not personalizing your treatment with exactly what this person needs through functional analysis, case conceptualization, and proper statistical tools, you're not treating. That's, I think, a world that can involve the entire world instead of just the weird world with their very expensive gold-plated doorknob randomized trials that don't give us the information we need anyway. So that's the windmill I'm tilting as an old man, but it's not just me. And I'm pleased to see that there's hundreds of young people around the world who are waking up to the fact that normal is a lie. Nobody is normal. And we need to deal with the diversity of human beings in ways that empower our ability to give them what they need.
Okay, perfect. The other question is, how does process-based therapy connect with modern psychometrics?
Well, the problem with psychometrics, and I was raised in that tradition, my mentor was trained by Alan Edwards of the Edwards Personality Inventory. He was the person who discovered the problem with social desirability responding and how that response set altered all self-reports. And his mentor was A.R. Gilliland, early psychometrician and one of the earliest persons ever to study the law of effect in non-human animals. But I've come to believe that traditional psychometrics violates the ergodic theorem massively. Let me give you an example. Suppose you said in Spanish, if you asked your client, you said, "What's bothering you?" Spanish, "Oh, it's like there's bees in my head." Could understand that, and we probably all experienced a time where our thoughts are like that. But here's what psychometrics would say. Oh, in order to understand what this person really means, we have to take a snapshot of him. Now we have to take a snapshot of 200 other people, minimum. He's different than this one, and 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 this one. So now we know what he means. This is insanity. No, you don't know what it means. To know what it means, you'd have to follow him over time. You'd have to see how he uses terms like that. And if you want every voice to matter, you can't just force everybody into speaking like the weird world. So what we've done when we talk about values, ACT, not so much. We've been much wiser, the contextual behavioral science community, but many wings. Positive psychology, Marty Seligman. Here are the values. According to who? When I talk to Indigenous people in Canada, and I've done that I've spent many, many hours with the knowledger, they have a 7-part model of values that I defy you to understand if you're not a member of the tribe. It has something to do with the Great Spirit, with the nature ancestors, things I don't think about, have no training in. I respect it. I want to understand it as best I can. And mostly what I want is if I'm treating an indigenous person, they should be able to talk about values their way, not my way. And I, if I'm a scientist, should figure out how to make sense of that one important person or couple or family or organization or tribe at a time. And we can do that. We have methods to do that now. We didn't, but with large language models, AI, with our iPhones being able to follow us around and even score what we say out loud, it's very different. When the decision was being made that we would only look across people at one point in time, or maybe two or three, instead of looking within persons, modeling that, and then and only then looking to see, are you similar or different to others who've been modeled in that same way? The early statisticians knew this was different, but it was very hard to work out by hand, and they had no computers. Plus, the dirty history of it is all of those early statisticians were eugenicists, all of them. And what they were trying to do in the psychology of individual difference was to figure out who was worthy of having children and who was not. And guess what? Upper class white people in the United Kingdom were worthy and everybody else wasn't, including some of my ancestors who died in ovens because we were on the list of people who are not worthy. And I can show you the quotes and they will make your skin crawl, of Carl Pearson, R.A. Fisher, Francis Galton, Frank Yates. The Yates correction, Pearson's R. These people were developing tools precisely in order to determine who is worthy and who is not. And our diagnostic system immediately became contaminated with that. My usual example is the person who invented the term schizophrenia. You probably know that it's Bleuler. And you know that he was a psychiatrist in the early part of the last century. In his first textbook on psychiatry in 1924, I'll send you the quote, he says the more severely disabled should be sterilized. And then he provides a rationale to keep the burden on us, those who are worthy of having children. Well, that's not too happy when you realize that those laws were written, involuntary sterilization occurred in the United States of America in every single state, and the laws were then borrowed 15 and 20 years later in Germany, word for word, because the psychologists and psychiatrists in the United States of America wrote those laws. Enough is enough. We have been sucked into 150 years of objectifying and dehumanizing people in the name of good science. And when the history is accurately written, behavioral science should beg for forgiveness. I know that's not likely, because what scientists do when they see the results of their actions is they say, oh, we were doing the best we can. It was the best available science. To which I say, well, wait a minute. How come physics knew you couldn't do it and behavioral science thought you could? And I have correspondence between Galton and some of the statisticians who created and analyzed the ergodic theorem. And so but I'm very suspicious that the physicists, who after all didn't have a field where they would be necessarily in their work caring about eugenics, came to a very different conclusion. And I can summarize it very easily. You don't need to know the geeky part. What the ergodic theorem says is you can go from a bell curve to predicting the future of people if everyone is identical and there are no trends. So if you're treating frozen clones, you should be happy with our behavioral science. If you're not treating frozen clones, you should be desperately unhappy, because we've been lying to our entire culture. And every kitchen table understands these lies in ways that gives them no way of thinking about anything else. Oh, my son was gifted and talented. Oh, so wonderful. Oh, mine was in special ed. Oh, how terrible. No, it doesn't predict people's future. It does not. It just tells you where they are relative to other people with a snapshot. So traditional psychometrics is going to have to go through, I think, a revolutionary phase. And what we're doing in the lab is we're developing measures of how badly the ergodicity is violated, what happens when you clean it up, and what you see when you clean it up. And the very happy news that I can share is already, we've only been working intensively on this for about 4 years. We are finding subgroups, people who function similarly, if and only if you model over time with a lot of data how their lives move up or down. If you put them into a bell curve, even if you do it over and over and over and over again, because you have a lot of longitudinal data, you cannot see the subgroups. They disappear. But if you model one at a time without any sharing of variance of information until everybody's modeled, and then you look for patterns, they're there. And I feel very much it's like we have been taking important minorities of people, 1 out of 8, 1 out of 10, trying to treat them with a one-size-fits-all model. And we've simply put cotton in our ears and duct tape over their mouths and demand that they not tell us about their own lives because we're oh so certain, based on, unfortunately, some of our psychometric and statistical tools that are lying to us and to everybody. So it's going to be a hard period. And I do want to be humble. Can't tell you that this approach will lead to better outcomes right now. There's a few indications. We do know that personalization, just taking the chains off, helps. But I also know that we've tried the other approach for 50 years with no area that I know of where the effect sizes are growing reliably in areas that people suffer. That's not a very impressive record, and more of the same is not going to yield anything different.
Okay. Okay. How does therapy change when shifting from diagnosis-based to process-based work?
Well, we can still call what we're doing diagnosis. It's still, it's definitely case conceptualization and functional analysis. It's just no longer categorical diagnosis. And it's not based on signs and symptoms that are thought to reveal latent diseases. The way that it changes is that, the way I describe it, it's like the features of this case come out from the background and they become very important. You really want to listen with big ears and watch with big eyes. And you have measures that are helping you listen and watch. And you are open to changing as you go. It's a more fluid system. A lot of what's coming out of the labs or the apps that we're developing. For example, I have an app called MindGrapher, which is a charitable app done by the Institute for Better Health, www.ibh.com, which is a 501c3, meaning it's a charitable organization. I take no money from it. I write big checks to it. I'm president, but a voluntary president. And what MindGrapher does is it takes the ecological momentary assessment data and it puts it through what we're calling idionomic statistics. They're idiographic, but they seek nomothetic principles. This is not different. If you're a behavior analyst, I'll give you an example of an idionomic, two examples. Idionomic concept, reinforcement and stimulus control. They're idionomic concepts. It was high density longitudinal data with very small numbers of organisms that identified reinforcement And now that you see it, you can define it functionally, but is now a general principle that is one of the strongest and most general principles known in all of psychology. So we want nomothetic, that means general laws. We want that. But don't confuse the aggregate with generally applicable laws. The aggregate, done the way we've been doing it, snapshot, 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 may be almost impossible to generalize. Conversely, if you really understand and look for what lifts people up, what pushes people down, your practice will change. Your elements will be smaller. It isn't, oh, everybody needs all elements of my protocol. It's not true. That's why if you tell clinicians, and this now has been studied, there's a meta-analysis with adolescents that we published last year, one with adults was published the year before, that if you simply say to clinicians, take this protocol, use what's useful, leave the rest for this person, you get better outcomes. The Cohen's D is around 2.21 without any guidance of processes or the rest. So I'm very hopeful, and we have some early studies suggesting that we can do a better job than that when we personalize based on what you actually need in terms of processes of change. So for example, if you are cognitively rigid and you need greater cognitive flexibility, we may need to work on your diffusion and your reappraisal skills. If you're emotionally rigid, we may need to work on your acceptance and your experiential non-attachment, letting go, even of good emotions, skills, and on it goes. So the biggest difference, I think, is that it's like looking at your client with color instead of just a pencil sketch. Something shows up. You can see more of a whole person, including, yes, the biophysiological level, but also the social cultural level. And if there's any area we've been weak in psychology, it has to be that one, where we have failed to understand and really consider the social context and culture from which people come. And time's up. We have to do a better job on that. So I think clinicians feel a sense of freedom. There are some tools, and like in the book that's over my shoulder there, that early on were paper and pencil. It looked very complicated, and I hope we can be forgiven because we're trying to work out how to do something very new. But now some of the things that were in that book, you can do in 10 minutes online. You can create a network. You can have your client do it before they come to a session, all by themselves, through a personalized life assessment network, which is part of Mindgrapher. And the ratings from clients and clinicians are very high. 95% of the clinicians like it, and a similar number of clients. Doesn't take long to review it clinically in session. And this is just the beginning, So, while I can't and should not overpromise, I'm very, very excited about what's happening, and I get up ready to go every day, ready to push the ball down the road, and we shall see. But can I say one other thing? This kind of an agenda of focusing on the individual or couple or family, but I mean the individual, I mean the particular. It can be the particular couple, the particular family, but instead of the abstraction of a aggregation, we call it group designs. They're not group designs, they're aggregate designs. In fact, you have to correct if anybody knows each other. If there actually is an intact group, you have to correct for it statistically. So it's not individual versus group. It's aggregated versus particularized. When we approach our clients in this way, we're finding new things, new tools, new ways of reaching people. And what I wanted to say is the core of the research action moves from the academic medical centers in the weird world You know, in many countries, you can't do a randomized controlled trial with the standards that people want unless you have $1 million to do it or more. My wife has a multi-site study. She's been working for 5 years. She's a brilliant grant writer. $11 million. One study. One study. How many countries in the world can do this? Tiny little number. I mean, even Italy can't do this. Never mind just, I mean, really, we're going to basically say to the world, only if you're in the rich European countries of the US of A, does your voice matter? No. Okay, so if we instead begin to move the attention to how processes of change unfold one important person at a time and how they can be moved. We can do that with clinicians around the world, collecting, interpreting, and using kernels that fit. And so we already have in Mindgrapher, the data collection and interpretation tool I mentioned, more than 600,000 data points on clients, fully de-identified, not even health information. We take out every possible thing that would allow you to triangulate and know who these people are. So HIPAA and GDPR compliant and private by design, we call it. If we broke into our own database, we could not figure out who those people are, but we can figure out how did the processes they need to change move when they were targeted in particular ways. And I'm looking forward to the day when clinicians, one important clinician with one important client or couple or family at a time, become the basis of the new knowledge that we need about how to serve those that who need help from us. And that's a worldwide effort. And can I say we already have back in the lab, it's not yet in the front end, a system where you can take any item in the client's own words, score it on a Likert type scale, and we will use AI tools to say, what is the dimension that's being targeted with that item? And did it tap into variation, selection, retention, or context? In other words, you don't have to tell your clients, oh, you have to answer this question that you don't even know what it means because it was modified based on consistency among people in Europe. Or otherwise we don't listen to you because we have to have standardized measures. Who are they standardized on? White people, rich people, European people. Enough is enough. I mean, this can't continue. So we have an ethical and scientifically responsible alternative. And we're going to pursue it and see if we can get the client, the clinician base, who is very frustrated with the DSM and the ICD. Most clinicians are. The most common diagnosis, as you probably know, is not otherwise specified. In other words, a junk diagnosis, because people are forced to genuflect in front of this horrible document, and instead they basically flip the finger to the bean counters and say, okay, it's not otherwise specified. That's fine, but it doesn't bring down the system nor change it, and PBT has a chance to do that. We can only create the revolution we need with data, and it's going to take a lot of work from a lot of people over probably the next 10 years.
Este video está auspiciado por nadie. Así que suscríbete, dale like, comparte, realmente apoyas muchísimo haciendo eso. Dicho esto, puedes seguir con el video. Okay. And about psychologists, what skill should a clinician develop to use this approach effectively?
Well, a skill you can develop even before you're using apps or things of this kind. There are two I would recommend. One is learn to read the processes in the room. Now, processes are happening If you see a person 1 hour a week, and let's say you see them for an hour, there's 167 hours you don't see them, and 1 hour you do. So we shouldn't think that only what goes on in the consulting room is of importance. That's a mistake. So we do need, I think, apps and measures that go home with people. But you can start your process-based journey by developing your spidey sense. You know, Spider-Man, right? You get that kind of sense. Your feelers are out. You know, that person, every time I mention sex, they seem to change the topic. What's going on there? Where you start seeing avoidance, you start seeing fusion, you start seeing, people being entangled in shame and so on. Now, with the help of the measures and statistics and AI, I think we can do even better. And we are developing tools that will help with that. So that's one, learn to see the processes. One of the things that we're doing in the lab and not yet in the app is we can score transcripts. And I see a day coming where you can literally say to your client, can I put this phone here on the table and it will record what we say, but it'll upload it into a fully de-identified database. Your name is not attached to it, no demographic information. Would you be willing to do it? Or maybe even, would you be willing to download this app and have it follow you around? Where we may be able to get information just from how the person's talking about things. We already tested that, myself and Gerhard Anderson, when we were doing some work on tinnitus using ACT and acceptance methods. And we showed that by session 3 of transcripts in session, clients who are going to respond were already changing their language about the ringing in their ears. I have tinnitus. I understand this. You would, if you start saying things like, well, I'm having the thought this is awful versus this ringing is awful, your brain lights up totally differently by those two ways. And you can see it even in the transcripts in the sessions. So the second thing I think people need, other than learning with some help and maybe training tools to read processes, is you need to begin to think of each human being or couple or family as a complex network. Nothing that we target is always helpful. Everything that we worry about is sometimes helpful. And I remember the shock that I felt when it turned out that ambulance drivers needed to suppress their emotions while they were on duty. But then we wanted them to have a healthy life, they needed to then open up the gates to their emotions when they got home. That's a very difficult thing. And at the time, this is 15, 20 years ago, I was thinking, emotion, no openness and acceptance is good for everybody. Yes, probably overall, but not every moment, not in every time. And if you're having to hear somebody saying, help me, help me, help me, and you know they're going to die, they're so injured, you cannot save them. It's your job to help me, help me, help me. Imagine what it's like to have that job every day. Well, you better have some real flexibility. And while you're on the job, you don't want the person crying so hard they can't even see the wounds they're trying to suture. So there's a time for emotional suppression. It's not a huge amount of times, but they're very important times. So we've come to see in our early work that you have to stop thinking of just good processes, bad processes. In PBT, in the early days, we had the model, the extended evolutionary meta model, and we had adaptive and maladaptive as the third dimension. Now it says context, because we realized all these processes are sometimes adaptive and sometimes maladaptive. And so your job then is to see the process in context. Let me give you an example. About 3 out of 40 people, when they focus on their values, get even more sad and more likely to be depressed. About 40%, when they focus on their values, do significantly better in terms of entanglement with sadness. And in the middle, about 50%, más o menos, they're neither clearly good or clearly bad. Well, these ones that are down there where values work makes them miserable, when we go one person at a time and begin to think about them as a system, what we're finding is that some of these people do not have the emotional openness skills to confront the fact that when they care, they hurt. And they see things they've done in their lives that are not helpful. And they also see how much sadness and pain is around them. You know, mindfulness is not sugar. It's not happy, happy, joy, joy. You know, if you have that kind of values-based openness and flexibility, you're going to see sadness in the world. A lot of it. What are you going to do about that? Well, it's a challenge for us all. So my point being, we need to begin to take these tools and process-based therapy and do what the better, deeper clinical traditions and wisdom traditions have done always, but without the help of science, to think of that personal journey as a complex system that's evolving. And I'm really, really excited about how network analysis, complex systems, AI tools, machine learning, things like the random forest procedure and so forth are opening up new ways to go forward instead of just looking at people and putting them on a bell curve based on how different they are from other people without looking about how their lives unfold over time.
Thanks. Thinking in future, sorry. For you, what's the future of process-based therapy in healthcare and training?
Well, I think it's going to be very important. Whether, people call it process-based therapy or remember that our team had anything to do with it or so forth, that is not important. I've been through this before with the so-called third wave and psychological flexibility and all of that. And all of us will be forgotten. That's just the way it is. But can we put things into the world that will be there for your children's children's children? And they need something. And they won't know it came from you. They might not even know your name. I challenge people when I'm giving this little rant. Can you name me all of your great-great-grandparents, including their maiden names? And only about 1 out of 200 people can do it. So that means it's not very long before even your family won't know who you are. So let's not be so prideful. Let's instead look at how can we move the ball down the road. And I think because this shift of the particular person over time being the unit, because this is so great and so close to clinicians' hearts, it's what they've wanted to do from the beginning and have been told by scientists, no, 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 no. Don't believe your lying eyes. Believe these smooth curves in the journal. These smooth curves are hardly ever seen in the clinic. People come in and they have all these different features and it goes up and down and it looks like a bowl of spaghetti. But then the nice smooth curve in the graph that's published where he said, this is what's really true. No, it isn't. This is an abstraction. What the clinician is seeing is far, far closer to the truth, far closer. So I believe that we're going to see a change in which systems of care and providers, and soon individuals who want help. I mean, many of us are wearing things like this. I can tell you how many steps I took today. I can tell you about my heart rate variability, how much sleep I had, how much of it was deep sleep, polyvagal tone was, over and over. I can take measures here. Well, I think the kids are getting used to the idea of being interested in their own lives and watching what lifts you up or pushes you down. So instead of this one size fits all normative categories, which young people don't want, they don't want to buy a book on abnormal psychology anymore. In the US of A, at least, people won't buy these books. They're still buying books on psychopathology. But long run, I think we're going to no longer have what we have with young people saying, oh, I'm unique, I'm not the same because, and then they list 10 different disorders they have. That's not uniqueness, my friend. If you just look at the less than 1 square inch of your fingertip on your index finger, how unique is that less than 1 square inch of skin? And the answer is 10 to the 11th. If you work out, it's never in the history of the world have 2 people had the same fingerprints if they're well taken out of 8 billion people. And if you look at the variation of the features, 10 to 11th, what does that mean? It means if you picked out a grain of sand for the beach and you said, how many other grains of sands would I have to pull before I found at least one person that has skin like mine on this less than 1 square inch? And the answer is all of the sand on Earth 1 million times over. It would take 1 million Earths. So 1 square inch of skin. So think about what that means into your genes, your epigenes, your brain circuits, the traumas you've had, the thoughts that you've had, the emotions that you feel, the relationships you've had that have been broken up or worked well, the sexual experiences you've had, the tragedies that have occurred. There is nobody like you. And there never, ever, ever, ever will be anyone like you. Never. Okay, how are we going to deal with that? And I'm out of a wing of science that says, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to brace that uniqueness and look within the organism over time and look for functional relations that reliably appear and try to put them into a functional analysis, into a network. Functional analysis is always a network. It's not like dominoes falling. It's this with this, with this, with this motivation operation, this reinforcer, this eliciting stimulus, this discriminative stimulus, and so on it goes. We can do this. We can do this. It's not going to be easy, but it's going to be, I think, a lot more productive. Now, can I promise that it's going to be more productive? I can't, except by metaphor. I do think we were doing a pretty good job in the early days of behavioral therapy before we got bought out by the DSM. When DSM-3 came, all of our behavioral therapy leaders began to be bought out. Well, bought out is a little cynical. They didn't do it just for money. They wanted to be central. But it carries a big downside. In the US of A, 1 out of 6 people last year were on antidepressants. 1 out of 4 women. 60% of them will have side effects with sexual anhedonia, for example. Just one side effect that looks like it may be lifelong if it's high dose for long term. This is not a good model. If you go out into the Gulf of Mexico and catch fish, it'll have antidepressants in it in the open ocean and so-called painkillers. They're not antidepressants and they're not painkillers. This is a marketing term for a 1.5 trillion industry that wants more and more and more, just like big tobacco, just like big oil. It's dollars and cents to them. And I don't think they're necessarily evil people, but it hasn't produced prosperity in the world. It's produced problems that are now more long-lasting, more resistant to change. So my faith is in the practitioners, not so much the scientists, and the ability of just human beings to say enough is enough.
Okay.
Nada más. That's what they need to say. Nada más.
Nada más. Yeah. Um, mm, we talk about skills and what are common mistakes in applying PBT?
Well, I think the most common mistake probably is to try to think that the analytic tools, these new tools, are going to give you the answer, when really what they do is they help you ask good questions. You still have to be a skilled clinician. You have to use the information that's given. You have to try it. But there's a lot of fear that AI and these tools are going to take over. I think that's very unlikely because the need is so great. And especially in this area, although people will and they are asking for help from ChatGPT or Grok or Gemini, that's happening right now. That I think the better parts of our nature will say, let's see, can we help our practitioners do more with less? And there are already persons practicing supporting people in using some of these tools where you don't see the person as often, but you actually interact with them more often because you're sending them nudges and bumps. You're looking at their data. You are having consults and so forth. So I don't know, but I don't know if that's our future, but I do think we need a future. Let me just give you a statistic that I think is shocking. Sometimes when I talk about this, people say, oh my goodness, tech is very expensive and you're just talking about things that wealthy people can use.
Yes.
Well, here's the fact, according to the WHO, 15% of the world's population has access to mental health care. 15%. The other 85% don't have meaningful access. It's too far away. It's too expensive. There's not enough trained providers. They won't take the kind of insurance or other things to do it. And so conversely, if you just say, well, how many people have access to one of these? That's my wife. She's a Brasileira, a gaúcha. Anyway, the answer is 80 to 90% of the world's population. So don't be telling me that this is something that only the rich can do, or that we are doing something that is only feeding the domination of the weird world. Quite the opposite. I want to put tools in people's hands around the world. And I'm working very hard on doing that. Our app and courses that I mentioned already is in Brazil. A Spanish language version is coming, also from the same company. It's in China. It's going to be in Malaysia. One important country at a time. So I think we can do this. I think we can find a way to reach people worldwide.
Okay. And what advice do you have for young psychologists starting in this field?
Well, I would say develop your skills, especially in reading processes. Stay broad. Be a little cautious about people who are trying to pull you in and say only this way is the right way. That's usually somebody who's trying to sell you something or trying to channel your energy in such a way that they can benefit from you. And, while ACT is a worldwide community with, by the way, a very vigorous chapter, even multiple chapters in Mexico, I think it's very important that people within that community stay broad. So you notice that the Association for Contextual Behavioral Science isn't the Association for ACT. Nobody can be anointed as being an expert in ACT. That's a little nervous, but why did we do this? Because as soon as you do that, you create a hierarchy. The founders are at the top, and next thing you know, they're getting money. How do you get them off to the top? They have to die. When they die, who goes to the top? Their disciples. Why? So from the very beginning, we've tried to create a more open community in which people share and support each other. And if you are becoming a recognized trainer, for example, let's say, and I hope some of you, if you're interested in ACT, you would become so. There are some good Spanish language recognized trainers in ACBS, including in your country. But, you know, as soon as the person says, only I can do this training, I'm special, you need to pay me special money, they go off the list. We've already taken 4 people who are very famous and shown them the door. Not because they're bad people, but because, look, we had a values statement and you signed it, that you would stay open and non-proprietary. If you have proprietary things, okay, do them, but don't call it ACT. And don't say you're the only one that knows how to do this. We want you instead to give away or train at low cost other people to learn how to do these innovative things. And so forth. You know, people have gotten the spirit, and, you know, you pay less to become a recognized trainer and ACT than you would to get a driver's license. I mean, it's very inexpensive. Just the cost of moving around the paper is about double what we charge. Well, my point being, let's come together in community where you bring your best ideas, but you also listen to the good ideas that are out there, and that we together in community begin to look very seriously at how these things combine and how best to support the lives of those we serve. And I'm proud of the ACBS community. It's done so far a pretty good job of that. And the proof is in the pudding. Let me just give you 2 or 3 quick examples. The most downloaded document in the whole World Health Organization website is Doing What Matters in Times of Stress. It's an ACT self-help book. It's in the Ukraine right now. It's in Bolivia right now. It's in Colombia right now. Why? Because we can take these ideas, and we know in wonderful randomized trials that we can actually prevent the development of mental health disorders, and we can ameliorate the impact of them at a level that's as high or higher as what you get with self-help in the wealthy world. So the WHO, if you get the book, at the beginning, you'll see in tiny, tiny print, like 6-point print, that it has to do with ACT, and that Russ Harris helped write it. When Mark Van Omeren came to me years ago, the head of mental health at WHO, I said, you don't want me to write this. I'm a little too geeky. Have Russ write it, because he's very, very good at writing about things in ways that are simpler. So there's a set of tapes in 20, 30 different languages, a cartoon book with pictures in 20, 30 languages. Why am I making this point? Well, if I walk you through some of the big, big randomized trials now in Lancet or Lancet Psychiatry or JAMA, Journal of American Medical Association, ACT is not some little corner over there now. We're playing with the big boys. There's 1,400 randomized trials, and some of them are in the very, very, very top most biobehavioral journals in the world. And what's the point on that? The point on that is our voice is being heard. And acceptance, mindfulness. I can summarize it this way, and this is a PBT thing. When we did the meta-analysis of all the processes, of all the studies ever to have studied whether or not a process of change was responsible for the outcomes, we looked at 55,000 studies. It took us 3 years. And we found about 300 that had measures that had been replicated at least once as an important pathway of change in what's called mediational analysis. You can account for the entire world's literature with this sentence. Life is asking you to be more open, aware, and actively engaged in a meaningful life, and extending that to your relationships and culture and your body. That's wonderful. 50 years of wandering around with syndromes, somehow or another, we've come up with a consensus of what are the most important processes. You can add others, but open, emotionally and cognitively open, aware, attentional flexibility from this more spiritual sense of self,
Yes.
actively engaged in a values-based life, putting it into habits, extending it to your relationships and culture. We are the social primates. That's part of the important context. And your body, because you're a biophysiological creature. And if you don't take care of your body, and if you're drinking and drugging and don't sleep and you're eating nothing but Twinkies, and you're not going to be able to live the kind of vital life that you want to live. Well, think about that in terms of what we now can say to the world. We can, with certainty and with pride, say to the whole world, from a process-based approach, you need to learn to be more open, aware, and actively engaged in a meaningful life while extending that to your relationships in your body. That's a pretty simple sentence. And there's not a culture or community around the world that doesn't understand this once you get time to translate it into their own terms. It's not top-down, Western. It's not. It's like reinforcement. Reinforcement's everywhere. But what the reinforcer is, no, that's not everywhere. And in the same way, yeah, values are everywhere. But what the value is, that's not everywhere. That's up to you. Even sense of self, there are languages where you can't say I, you. You can only say we, they. Japanese, for example. So, we can push this reset button and get back on the same page and begin to build the kind of science that is more adequate to the challenge of the human condition.
Okay. The last question, I told you I'm from Peru.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And
yeah, I love Peru. Very, very beautiful.
yes. The question is, if you have a message for Peruvian psychologists, maybe short.
A little statement for Peruvian psychologists. Well, I mean, if we're talking about the importance of culture, my goodness, look at the ancient culture that you have produced and represent. And yes, the European world stomped on it and, was very, very cruel in how native Peruvians were treated. But to this day, you're part of a culture that is a wonder of the world. And it's not just looking backwards. If you travel throughout Peru and you have the opportunity to speak to people, you see the quality of the people in Peru. And I've been there many, many times. The first when I was just an assistant professor in Arequipa. And I've been in many, many different areas. And I know the challenges that you faced. I mean, the Shining Path guerrillas, or the poverty, or I've been in libraries in Arequipa where most of the books had been stolen in the university, and on it goes. I understand how hard it's been on the one hand. On the other hand, you have such magnificent institutions of all kinds. I mean, if you really want to eat some wonderful meals, go to Lima. Oh my God, but not just that, not just at of course, I mean, but, I when I was head of the World Congress years and years ago of CBT, we had to decide between Australia and Peru of which would get the next World Congress. And the Australians came in with a book this thick, and they're opera house and all the wonderful things and DVDs and and what the head of Alamak did was come in and talked about Peruvian culture and how important it's been to the world and how important it is to that the helping professions touch that culture and are uplifted by it. And I'm proud to say we were able to win that vote. It was not an easy vote. And when I went to Lima, and by then I was no longer the head of the World Congress, I was just super proud of the way that it was pulled off. And, despite some of the Europeans worrying, oh, people are going to be victims of crime and they're going to, no, please. No, it was a wonderful event. So one of the things I would say just to your colleagues is your voice matters. And if you do explore the process-based therapy work, and don't think of it as a new form of therapy, it's not that, but as a new way of thinking about and empowering a scientific journey that is practical and pays off for practitioners, I think you may find there something that will amplify your voice and help it to spread around the world in a way that will be good for humanity. I hope that's true and that you find something in the work that has that. And I so much look forward to seeing the product of your creativity and the heart that you bring to the work that you do in one of my favorite countries in the world.
Okay. So I'm going to speak in Spanish first and then in English too. Okay. Bueno, muchas gracias, Dr. Hayes, y también a todas las personas que han estado y se han quedado hasta esta parte de la entrevista. That's all for today. Thank you very much, Dr. Hayes, and thanks to everyone who stayed with us and until the end. Goodbye. Okay.
Ciao.
Okay.